Billy the Kid is one of the most legendary outlaws in American history, but how much of what you think you know about him is actually true? Beneath the Gunsmoke and Dime novel myths lies a story far stranger than fiction. From rumors of royal blood to secret escapes, and even claims he survived his own death, the truth about Billy the Kid is packed with twists most folks never believed. So saddle up because we're about to uncover 10 shocking facts that'll make you see the kid in a whole new light. If you're fascinated by hidden history and the untamed truths of the Wild West, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a shot from our channel. He was orphaned at age 15. Henry McCarty, who would later earn infamy as Billy the Kid, experienced an unstable and often uncertain early life. Born in late 1859, most likely in New York City, he was the son of Irish immigrants Catherine and Patrick McCarty. Records about his exact birthplace and date are scarce, which has contributed to the mystery surrounding his life. Tragedy struck early when Henry's father passed away while he was still a young child. Left to raise her two sons alone, Catherine McCarty sought a fresh start. The small family moved first to Indiana, then to Wichita, Kansas, and eventually settled in the New Mexico territory. These frequent relocations reflected both Catherine's efforts to support her family and the challenges of life on the frontier for a single mother. In the early 1870s, Catherine married William Antrim, a man who offered some hope of stability. However, the arrangement did not last. Around the time Catherine's health began to decline due to tuberculosis, a common and deadly illness in that era, Antrim distanced himself from the family. He moved to Arizona, effectively leaving Henry and his younger brother Joseph without adult guidance. Catherine passed away on September 16, 1874, in Silver City, New Mexico. Henry was just 15 years old. Her death marked a turning point in his life. With no surviving parent and no steady home, the teenage boy was left to navigate a harsh world on his own. He soon found work in boarding houses and took odd jobs to get by. According to some accounts, he was polite, literate, and eager to earn an honest living, at least in the beginning. These early experiences of loss, movement, and abandonment shaped the young Henry McCarty's path. Before he ever picked up a gun or earned the name Billy the Kid, he was simply a boy growing up too fast in a rapidly changing and often unforgiving American West. His first crime. After the loss of his mother, young Henry McCarty found himself without close family support or financial security. Still, he made efforts to survive through honest means. In Silver City, New Mexico, he managed to arrange room and board at a local boarding house. In exchange, he performed chores, sweeping, washing dishes, and running errands, common tasks expected of boys with no means to pay rent. By most local accounts, he was quiet, respectful, and eager to please. However, life in a frontier town offered limited options for a teenager with no guardian. The safety net simply didn't exist for orphans like Henry, and over time his situation grew more desperate. Exactly 1 year after his mother's passing, on September the 16th, 1875, Henry was reportedly caught taking food, likely out of hunger rather than mischief. Just 10 days later, a more serious incident occurred. He allegedly entered a Chinese laundry business and took clothing and a pair of pistols. This act was considered theft under territorial law. The authorities soon arrested him, and Henry was placed in jail for the first time. While this may have marked the beginning of his legal troubles, it's important to understand the broader picture. The late 1800s offered very little opportunity or compassion for young people on the margins of society. For orphaned teens like Henry, small missteps were often met with harsh consequences, and one encounter with the law could quickly spiral into a permanent stain on one's reputation. This early chapter of Henry's life reveals more than just a boy stealing out of need. It shows a young person slipping through the cracks of a system unprepared to help him. These experiences would ultimately steer him toward the outlaw legend he later became, though they began as acts of survival more than rebellion. His descent into lawlessness was rapid. Just 2 days after being placed in jail in Silver City, Henry McCarty managed to slip away and avoid further confinement. According to reports published by the Silver City Herald, His sudden disappearance marked the beginning of his life on the run. After fleeing, Henry reportedly sought refuge at the home of his stepfather, William Antrim. Their relationship, already strained after Antrim had distanced himself from the family, offered little comfort. Henry is believed to have taken some clothing and a firearm from the household, items that would help him continue his journey into unfamiliar and rugged territory. He headed into southeastern Arizona territory, a vast region of scattered ranches, mining towns, and military outposts. Despite his reputation slowly taking shape, Henry initially found legitimate work as a ranch hand, laboring with livestock and learning skills that were useful on the open frontier. His time around ranches and military installations would soon draw him into less lawful company. It was during this period that he became acquainted with John R. Mackey, a former private in the U.S. Cavalry. The two reportedly began taking unpermitted horses from soldiers stationed in the area, an offense that was not uncommon in the chaotic post-Civil War West, where Army property was often loosely guarded and poorly accounted for. For many struggling young men, such activities were seen as opportunistic rather than outright criminal. A turning point in Henry's story occurred in the small village of Bonita. At a local saloon, he became involved in a confrontation with a blacksmith named Francis P. Windy Cahill. Cahill, a much larger man, had reportedly mocked and harassed Henry on previous occasions. When the two clashed again, a physical struggle broke out, and the situation quickly escalated. Cahill sustained injuries during the altercation and passed away shortly afterward. Though Henry may have acted in the heat of fear or self-defense, the result was serious. He was arrested and held in a military guardhouse. Yet once again he found a way to escape, avoiding prosecution and continuing his life on the run. It was during this turbulent time in Arizona that people began to refer to him as Kid Antrim, a name derived from his youthful appearance and his connection to his stepfather Antrim. By 1877, however, Henry began using the alias William H. Bonney, a name that would appear on later arrest records and wanted posters. Eventually, the press and the public combined his various identities into a single, now iconic moniker, Billy the Kid, or simply the Kid. Rather than being the product of a single moment or crime, the legend of Billy the Kid evolved gradually, shaped by hardship, identity shifts, and a young man's attempt to survive in a lawless and uncertain American frontier. He joined a gang of rustlers. After leaving Arizona territory behind, Henry McCarty, by then more widely known as Billy the Kid, made his way back into New Mexico. The journey was long and difficult, and at one point, he reportedly lost his horse during an encounter with Apache groups active in the region. Whether the horse was taken or abandoned for survival reasons is unclear, but the incident left him traveling on foot through unforgiving terrain. Eventually, he arrived at Fort Stanton, a remote outpost in southeastern New Mexico. Weakened from the journey and likely malnourished, he was in poor physical condition. Fortunately, he found a safe haven with the family of John Jones, a known associate who was involved in local outlaw activity. Jones's mother took him in and provided care while he recovered, a gesture of kindness that may have saved his life. Once restored to health, Billy fell in with a group engaged in cattle theft, an activity that had become increasingly common in the wide, unregulated spaces of New Mexico territory. At the time, tensions over land and livestock ownership were high. Competing factions of ranchers, cowboys, and business interests often clashed over grazing rights, branding disputes, and accusations of rustling. The group Billy joined began targeting cattle herds in Lincoln County, an area dominated by powerful rancher John Chisholm. Chisholm, one of the most prominent cattle magnates in the Southwest, managed large grazing operations and employed men to guard his stock. For struggling young men like Billy and his companions, however, Chisholm's vast herds represented an opportunity to challenge the existing power structures and possibly earn a living outside the limited legal economy of the frontier. Though these activities would eventually draw more attention from law enforcement and rival factions, at this stage, Billy was just one of many young drifters navigating the blurred lines between survival, loyalty, and the law, in a territory where justice was often decided by who held the most influence or firepower. This period marked the beginning of Billy the Kid's deeper involvement in the Lincoln County conflicts that would later define his legacy, placing him squarely in the middle of one of the most turbulent chapters of the American Old West. He became embroiled in the Lincoln County War. During his time in Lincoln County, Billy the Kid became entangled in one of the most complex and bitter disputes of the American frontier. What began as a simple charge of horse theft soon turned into something far larger and far more personal. The horses in question belonged to John Henry Tunstall, a young English rancher and businessman who had recently arrived in New Mexico territory with ambitions of building a cattle empire. Rather than pursue charges, Tunstall offered Billy employment on his ranch. This gesture marked a turning point in Billy's life, providing him with legitimate work and a sense of loyalty to someone who had treated him with respect. Tunstall stood out in the region, not only because of his foreign background, but also due to his rising economic success. His business ventures, which included cattle and mercantile interests, posed a direct threat to an entrenched group of powerful merchants and ranchers tied to the so-called Murphy-Dolan faction. This group controlled much of the trade and political power in Lincoln County and viewed Tunstall as a disruptive outsider. Tensions escalated quickly. On February 18, 1878, a posse affiliated with Tunstall's rivals attempted to take control of his livestock under questionable legal authority. During this confrontation, Tunstall lost his life. His death sent shock waves through the community and set off a prolonged and deeply rooted conflict that came to be known as the Lincoln County War. In the immediate aftermath, Alexander McSween, Tunstall's business partner, and Tunstall's foreman, Richard Dick Brewer, took steps to pursue justice. Brewer was appointed a special constable under the authority of the local justice of the peace, giving him the ability to form a temporary law enforcement group. Billy the Kid joined this group, known as the Regulators. The Regulators saw themselves as legitimate peacekeepers, tasked with bringing those responsible for Tunstall's death to justice. However, in the chaotic and divided legal environment of Lincoln County, others viewed them as vigilantes. The lines between law enforcement and personal vengeance became increasingly blurred. Billy's involvement with the Regulators deepened his commitment to a cause that, at least initially, had been about loyalty and justice. But as the conflict escalated into open warfare between rival factions, his actions would carry long-term consequences that further solidified his reputation, both as a folk hero and as an outlaw, depending on which side of the story was being told. This chapter of his life reveals a young man swept up in a broader power struggle, where law and loyalty often clashed, and where survival meant choosing sides in an environment without clear rules. The Kid fought in the Battle of Lincoln. In the months following the death of John Tunstall, the conflict in Lincoln County intensified. The group known as the Regulators, which included Billy the Kid, became more active in confronting those they believed responsible. However, the pursuit of justice quickly evolved into a larger and more dangerous struggle between rival factions. One controversial moment came when the Regulators were involved in the deaths of 3 men who had been taken into custody. While the circumstances surrounding the incident remained debated, it marked a turning point. The territorial authorities, particularly Governor Samuel B. Axtell, responded by declaring the Regulators to be outlaws. What had started as a deputized posse now stood on the opposite side of the law, at least in the eyes of the territorial government. As tensions continued to grow, both sides prepared for a showdown. That moment came in July 1878 in the town of Lincoln. The confrontation, now known as the Battle of Lincoln, lasted 5 days and became one of the most dramatic episodes in the Lincoln County War. During the standoff, members of the Regulators barricaded themselves inside buildings throughout the town, exchanging fire with opponents that included local lawmen and their allies. While the Regulators were outnumbered, they held their ground, relying on their familiarity with the terrain and a fierce determination to defend their position. The conflict came to a decisive end only when U.S. Army troops arrived from nearby Fort Stanton. They brought with them overwhelming firepower, including a Gatling gun and a 12-pound howitzer. Their presence signaled that the federal government would no longer tolerate the ongoing disorder. Under the weight of this military force, the battle drew to a close. Many members of the regulators were either captured, scattered, or killed during and after the confrontation. Remarkably, Billy the Kid was able to escape the town before being caught. His successful flight added to his growing mystique, and accounts of his boldness during the battle began to spread. By the time the smoke cleared, Billy had emerged with a new public image. Though still a young man, he was now widely regarded as a seasoned and elusive figure of the American frontier, one whose name was beginning to carry weight in newspapers and campfire tales alike. Whether viewed as a hero or a troublemaker, his reputation as a skilled and daring survivor of the Lincoln County War was firmly established. His murder of lawmen made him ineligible for a pardon. In the aftermath of the Lincoln County War, the territory of New Mexico was left divided and unstable. Communities were fractured, law enforcement was inconsistent, and old rivalries still simmered. To bring an end to the lingering conflict and reestablish peace, a new territorial governor was appointed. Lew Wallace, a Union general and future author, best known for writing Ben-Hur. Understanding that prolonged bloodshed was doing little to serve the interests of the territory or the federal government, Governor Wallace offered a general amnesty. His proclamation was aimed at encouraging all parties involved in the Lincoln County conflict to lay down their arms and move forward without fear of legal retribution for past actions, provided they agreed to cease hostilities. However, the terms of this offer came with limitations. Individuals involved in specific high-profile killings, particularly those of law enforcement officers, were excluded. Unfortunately for Billy the Kid, his alleged role in the deaths of two sheriffs during the course of the conflict placed him outside the bounds of this clemency. Though Billy briefly attempted to negotiate with Governor Wallace, hoping to clear his name in exchange for cooperation and testimony, the deal ultimately fell apart. Whether due to miscommunication, shifting political priorities, or mistrust on both sides, the opportunity for redemption slipped away. As a result, Billy remained a fugitive. Though still in his late teens, he had become one of the most wanted men in the territory. His legend continued to grow, not simply because of his actions, but because of the stories told about him. Stories that painted him as everything from a misunderstood youth to a symbol of resistance in a land where justice was not always evenly applied. The kid's refusal, or inability, to reintegrate into society after the war marked the beginning of the final chapter of his life, one shaped as much by missed opportunities as by the choices he made. Billy the Kid had a famous escape. In April 1879, Billy the Kid made a formal attempt to resolve his legal troubles by appearing before a grand jury. He hoped that by cooperating with authorities, he might receive a pardon for his role in the Lincoln County War. Governor Lew Wallace had previously suggested the possibility of clemency, particularly if Billy provided testimony in ongoing legal proceedings. However, whether due to political shifts or procedural delays, the promised pardon never came through. With the legal process stalled and his status still uncertain, Billy remained in a precarious position. Not long afterward, an incident occurred in Fort Sumner, an isolated town where he often sought refuge. In a saloon confrontation involving a local man who had reportedly been drinking heavily, tensions rose. During the altercation, Billy used his firearm, resulting in the man's death. Though details of the event remain contested, the fact that the incident involved a well-known figure like Billy brought renewed scrutiny. His presence at a nearby ranch later became linked to another fatal encounter involving a local individual, further damaging his reputation. These events prompted territorial officials to act decisively. A bounty of $500, a significant sum at the time, was issued for Billy the Kid's capture and delivery to the sheriff of Lincoln County. The sizable reward attracted considerable attention from both lawmen and bounty hunters. Sheriff Pat Garrett, a former acquaintance of Billy's and now the territory's most prominent lawman, took on the task. Over the following months, Garrett led an intense pursuit, and though Billy evaded him for some time, he eventually surrendered near Stinking Springs on December 23, 1880. His arrest was seen as a major victory for Garrett and a turning point in the law's effort to restore control in the region. Billy was transported back to Lincoln, where he awaited execution for his prior actions. But in April 1881, while under guard in the county courthouse, he made a bold escape. Reports state that he managed to disarm one of his guards, taking possession of the deputy's firearm. In the chaos that followed, a second guard attempted to intervene, but Billy was able to retrieve a shotgun from the sheriff's office. With both guards incapacitated, he then broke his leg shackles using a nearby axe. He fled the courthouse, mounted a horse, and disappeared once again into the New Mexico countryside. This daring escape added another dramatic chapter to the legend of Billy the Kid and further cemented his image as a clever and determined figure, one who could navigate even the most desperate circumstances with confidence and cunning. While his freedom would not last long, this escape remains one of the most talked about moments in his story, demonstrating the blurred lines between survival, notoriety, and myth in the Old West. Billy the Kid's reputation was spread through editorials. The name Billy the Kid began to take on a life of its own, not only through his actions, but also through how those actions were reported. The first known use of this now iconic nickname in print appeared in the pages of the Las Vegas Gazette, a prominent New Mexico newspaper of the time. J. H. Kugler, the editor and publisher of the paper, played a significant role in shaping the public's perception of the young outlaw. His articles followed Billy's movements, especially during his time on the run, and often highlighted the kid's cleverness, agility, and ability to evade capture. Though Kugler was reporting on actual events, his storytelling style leaned toward dramatization, blurring the line between fact and legend. Through Kugler's pen, Henry McCarty, who had gone by several names, including William H. Bonney, was firmly established in the public imagination as Billy the Kid. The nickname reflected both his youth and the mysterious persona he had developed. To readers across the New Mexico territory and beyond, he became more than just a name in a legal report. He was now a symbol of the wild, unpredictable nature of frontier life. The Gazette's coverage helped spread Billy's story far beyond the communities that had actually encountered him. At a time when newspapers were the primary source of information and entertainment, this kind of reporting played a powerful role in creating lasting cultural figures. While some accounts portrayed him as a dangerous outlaw, others emphasized his charm, intelligence, and uncanny ability to outwit his pursuers. This early media attention marked the beginning of Billy the Kid's transformation into legend, an enduring figure who would continue to capture the imagination of Americans long after the final chapters of his life were written. He was killed by Pat Garrett. Billy the Kid's life came to an end in the summer of 1881, when he was only 21 years old. By that time, he had already become a figure of national fascination, with his reputation spreading far beyond the borders of New Mexico territory. His final days were spent near Fort Sumner, a familiar place where he had friends and often sought shelter. Pat Garrett, then serving as sheriff of Lincoln County, was tasked with locating and apprehending him. Garrett, who had once known Billy personally, relied heavily on information gathered from local residents to track his movements. Community ties and whispers played a crucial role in narrowing down the kid's location. Late one night near midnight, Garrett quietly approached a house where Billy was believed to be staying. Accounts of what happened next vary, but most agree that Garrett entered the dwelling and encountered Billy unexpectedly. In the darkness and confusion, a fatal confrontation occurred. It was a quiet, almost anticlimactic end to the life of someone who had been at the center of so many dramatic episodes. News of Billy the Kid's death traveled quickly. His notoriety, already widespread due to newspaper stories and public fascination, now reached a global audience. One of the most striking examples of this was the Times of London, which published an obituary noting the young man's passing. The fact that a British newspaper of such prominence acknowledged the event illustrates how deeply the legend of Billy the Kid had already taken hold in the public imagination. Though his life had been short, Billy had become more than just a figure in a regional feud. He came to represent the complexities of the American frontier, its blurred lines between right and wrong, lawman and outlaw, myth and reality. His death, while marking the end of his physical journey, only added to the growing legend that would continue to evolve long after the dust of the Old West had settled. Billy the Kid may have died young, But his legend has lived for nearly a century and a half, shaped by rumor, embellished by newspapers, and etched into the mythology of the American West. From secret identities to impossible escapes, it's clear that the truth behind the kid is stranger and more fascinating than fiction. So the next time you hear his name, remember, behind every Dusty Wanted poster lies a story no one ever fully believed, but couldn't stop repeating. If you love digging into the forgotten, the mysterious, and the downright unbelievable tales of the Old West, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell, because the Wild West still has plenty of secrets to tell.